here, and welcome once again to another tier list video. I know the last one I did was for the MCU movies and TV shows, but this one I just realized I never actually did this one yet, and with the most recent one coming out last year, I thought, you know what, this would be a good time to actually do my tier list for the Disney live action remakes. Now, there aren't a lot. There's only 19 Disney live action remakes as of right now, at least ones I know of. If there are any other ones I missed, let me know. But in this regard, I'm just going to be ranking 19 of the 19 Disney live action remakes that I'm aware of, starting with 101 Dalmatians, working my way up to The Little Mermaid. So, without further ado, let's get into this tier list for the Disney live action remakes. Hey guys, so here we are at the Disney live action tier list. Now, thankfully, I have seen every single one of these movies. Now, before I get into it, I'm not sure if y'all have already spotted it, but I accidentally added the Lion King live action movie twice, but I'm only going to be counting the one that's right here on the list. The one at the very end I'm not really going to use too much, so just getting that out of the way before anyone says anything. So without further ado, let's get into the first Disney live action remake that we are ranking, which is 101 Dalmatians. Now, this was the first one that they adapted into live action form. Now, to be fair, some of these Disney live action remakes are from like the early, are ones based on animated classics from the 60s, sometimes even the 50s, with movies like Cinderella on here, and but these are, and some of these are from the Disney Renaissance, which are basically movies that I sort of grew up with. But when it comes to these Disney live action remakes with 101 Dalmatians, I will say Glenn Close as Cruella de Vil, she was, I gotta admit, she was pretty spot on as Cruella de Vil. Excuse me. And honestly, she really pulled off a great Disney villain in live action form. Now, there is one other person on here who managed to do a really good job as in their live action role as a villain from Disney, but we'll get to that movie in a little bit. But with 101 Dalmatians, I thought it was okay. I mean, it was the first movie to be released for Disney live action remakes, and it was good for its time, I will admit. And it wasn't, I was a little disappointed that they switched out Roger's origin, where he wrote songs pretty much and played the piano, and he didn't do that Cruella de Vil song that he did in the original, and they made him a video game designer, so I was a little disappointed with that. But other than that, the movie pretty much told the story of the Dalmatians, and the funny thing is they don't even talk in the live action movie, which I thought was crazy, but it was good enough that I think I put it in the C category. It was not that bad, if I'm being totally honest. Next up, we got the sequel, 102 Dalmatians. Now, to be fair, the second movie wasn't adapted from an animated sequel to 101 Dalmatians, but I think it did feature some elements from a video game that was created of the same name, 102 Dalmatians, which I have played. In fact, I think I even have it somewhere over here underneath my TV. But this sort of shows like a story of Cruella de Vil after she first got arrested in the original, and she seems to be reformed, right? Like, it seems like she's gone through some sort of therapy that made her stop being obsessed over Dalmatians, until they find out that until she gets snapped out of the therapy by apparently the sound of the bell ringing, which I thought was interesting. But the way they told this story was unfortunate, because they don't use the original characters of Roger and Anita from the first movie, and they kind of messed it up a little bit. I will say this is one of the weaker movies. In fact, I'll probably put it in the D category for it wasn't as good as the first movie, and I will admit that. Now we move on to the next movie, which is Alice in Wonderland. Now, funny enough, the 102 Dalmatians came out in in the year 2000, I believe, and it wasn't until 10 years later that we get another Disney live-action remake, that being Alice in Wonderland. Now, I never watched the original animated Alice in Wonderland. I still haven't. If y'all saw my tier list for the Disney animated films and Pixar films, you see that I put Alice in Wonderland as one of the movies I never saw. And I still haven't seen it even to this day since I made that video. But I did see the live action movie, and I will say, I think I've heard some elements from the original animated classic, and this seems, and I don't know if this necessarily served as a live action remake, or if it's like a sequel, but in live action in a way, because I swear it made it seem like the story elements of the original animated classic were like preceding this movie. Like, we see flashbacks of her when she was a little girl in Wonderland, and it's like, isn't that some elements I heard from the animated classic? Like, is this supposed to serve as like what, a sequel, but in live action form in some way? Like, I didn't quite get that, but I thought it was interesting. And Johnny Depp as the Mad Hatter, perfect casting, if I'm being honest. At least in this movie, he was a great addition as the Mad Hatter. Johnny Depp can always pull off some comedic moments, and I really enjoyed that about him. Now, I will say though, it's not a great film, especially because I never saw the original, so I wouldn't know how well I should have received it. So, in fact, I'm probably going to put it just above 101 Dalmatians in the C category. It was still a relatively good film, but we'll get to some of the better films in a little bit. But next we move on to Maleficent. Now, technically, this is supposed to be a live-action remake of Sleeping Beauty, but it's told through the villain's perspective this time, that being Maleficent, as the name implies. Now, she's played by Angelina Jolie, which I will admit, she did relatively well as the villain in this first movie, but they did sort of turn it around where instead of her being the big villain of the story, she's actually sort of like an anti-hero in a way. And the king in the story of Sleeping Beauty, King Stefan, is actually the bad guy. And I gotta admit, that was a pretty big surprise that they created that little twist. But Angelina Jolie plays the character relatively well. So well, in fact, that I think I put her movie in the B category. Her first movie, that is. Because we do have a sequel to her film, which I will talk about later. But the first Maleficent movie I thought was okay. I mean, it wasn't a masterpiece, but I still thought it was relatively okay. Next up, we have Cinderella. Now, this is one of those movies that actually, funny enough, this is, I think, the first movie that, out of all these Disney live-action remakes, this one, I think, was released first in animated form. And if I remember correctly, if I'm not, let me know in the comments. But with Cinderella, I thought this movie was relatively amazing. I mean, sure, they changed a few story elements where we even got to see a little bit more of an extended version of her being forced to be a slave to her stepmother and her stepsisters. And we even get to see her father for a little bit until we find out how he died and what ended up becoming of that. And that was a pretty good introduction to that. They did unfortunately change the prince's name, which I thought was interesting. But still, I think it was a relatively good film. So much so that it's actually going to go in the A category for me. I thought it was a relatively good Disney live-action remake, I must admit. Next up, we have The Jungle Book. Now, The Jungle Book, it's been a while since I've seen this movie, but it was directed by Jon Favreau, who directed another movie on this list, which we will get to. But The Jungle Book, again, it's been a while, but if I gotta be honest, it was such a good film when it comes to telling the story in live-action form. So much so that I may actually put it, once again, in the A category, just above Cinderella. Definitely a worthy live-action sequel. Or, not sequel, live-action remake. We're about to get into a sequel though with Alice Through the Looking Glass. Now just like 102 Dalmatians, I think this movie was sort of made as sort of a standalone sequel in a way that wasn't based on anything that came out before. And now, unfortunately, this was made right around the time that Johnny Depp was going through some issues with his then ex-wife Amber Heard, which we all know how that turned out. But with this movie, I think it was a little strange the way they told it with Johnny Depp's character of the Mad Hatter as with his backstory, and heck, apparently there was even a side quest with or side story I should say between the Red Queen and the White Queen, and apparently how they were sisters. And I gotta say I was pretty surprised with that, but it wasn't really a good story, and I'm probably gonna end up putting this in the D category right in front of 102 Dalmatians. Honestly, it was not that great of a film. Next up, we get Beauty and the Beast. Now, this, you may find this shocking, but this is one of the first Disney live-action remakes that I will say deserves to be in the S tier. Really solid film. So much so that I think casting Emma Watson, Hermione Granger herself, as the titular character, I loved how they did that. And they even introduced an original song to this movie with Evermore, sung by the Beast. Now, some people have told me that song is actually from a Broadway musical version of the original animated classic, and they just featured it in the live action remake. If that's true, then I guess it's not surprising that they did that. But I will say it's one of the best Disney live action remakes I've seen so far. Next up, we have Christopher Robin. Now, this is technically a live-action remake of Winnie the Pooh, and it sort of serves as like a sequel in a way in live action. That's why I said the same thing with Alice in Wonderland. But this one, I will say, if I'm being totally honest, this one is actually better than Alice in Wonderland in my opinion, but just barely. That's probably all I'm going to say about it. Next up, we got Dumbo. Now, this is the first Disney live-action remake to actually be directed by, get this, Tim Burton. And if I'm being totally honest, I don't think Tim Burton really fits as a Disney director. I really don't think he can pull that off. He's more into like not really full-on horror elements, but he's like into more scary elements when it comes to being a director. I mean, he's directed Beetlejuice. He's directed the new Wednesday show that just came out. I think it was either last year or the year before that. And he's about to come out with his new sequel to Beetlejuice called Beetlejuice. Oh, I think I just said his name 3 times in a row. Don't attack me, Beetlejuice. But anyways, but no, with Dumbo, again, I never watched. I mean, it's been a while since I watched the original Dumbo, but this seemed a little too dark for its taste. In fact, I think it's probably going to be just below 102 Dalmatians for me. Not a really good film, if I'm being honest. Now we get into another movie that's probably going to end up in the S tier, Aladdin. And now, do I like it more than Beauty and the Beast? Nah, I still think Beauty and the Beast is a good film, but these are both relatively good films in my opinion. They really told their stories well, and they really stuck true to the source material a lot, and I am really excited for that. Now, next up we get to The Lion King. Now, a lot of people keep saying that this doesn't really count as a live action remake because it's still it's nothing but animals, and they barely made them seem like they were moving their mouths too much, so you didn't really know they were talking. And to be fair, even though this was also directed by Jon Favreau, unfortunately it serves as probably one of the worst movies. Now, I will say though, it's not as bad as Alice Through the Looking Glass, 102 Dalmatians, or Dumbo, but I still think it deserves to be in the D category. we haven't gotten an F tier yet, but don't worry. I think I have at least one movie left that I'm going to put there. Next up, we have Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. This is the sequel to Maleficent. Now, it was weird that they decided to continue the story somewhat, but I gotta admit, it was actually one of the better movies to end up in the C category, right below the first Maleficent. It was an interesting take on the story of Sleeping Beauty in a way. And it even introduced some new lore with Maleficent's character and what kind of creature she was, and I was like, interesting. But next up, we got Lady and the Tramp. Now, it's been a while since I saw this, because as a matter of fact, this came out right before the pandemic hit, and it took me a while to actually watch it on Disney Plus officially. But if I'm being honest, Lady and the Tramp was something I wasn't too interested in. In fact, I'm probably just going to put it right behind Maleficent, Mistress of Evil. It was a decent film, if I'm being honest, but again, I never saw the original Lady and the Tramp, so I may have to go back and rewatch that. But next up, we got Mulan. Now, unfortunately, this is one of those Disney live-action remakes that was released straight to Disney Plus. Like, there was no theatrical release. Actually, I think it did have a theatrical release, but not surprisingly, it was only released in China. And now, unfortunately, you may find this shocking, but I didn't think it was a worthy live-action remake to Mulan. I've seen Mulan, and if y'all have seen the video I did where I actually provided my own voice toward the song "I'll Make a Man Out of You" from Mulan, I might put that link in the description below if y'all want to go watch that. But unfortunately, they completely cut the music from this movie. Like, all the songs that were sang by the characters in the original animated film were completely cut. Even Mushu, the biggest comedic character of the film, was cut out, and I was not very happy about that. Now, I will say it's probably much better than Alice Through the Looking Glass, 102 Dalmatians, and Dumbo, but unfortunately it's not good enough to beat out The Lion King, in my opinion. Next up, we got Cruella. Now, this may come as a shock, but this is supposed to be a prequel to show how Cruella became as cruel as she did in the 101 Dalmatians. Now, she isn't portrayed by Glenn Close in this movie, but I heard Glenn Close was actually a part of the behind-the-scenes team in helping create the character, and she's played by Emma Stone in this movie. And I will say, Emma Stone actually did a pretty good job portraying the character. In fact, I actually think she did so well that I'm actually going to put it right behind Maleficent in the B category. She was relatively good in the role, and I hear there's even a sequel coming out. So hopefully the sequel to Cruella does better than the sequel to 101 Dalmatians. But we'll see how that turns out. Next up, we got Pinocchio. Now, I know this movie was directed by one of those big iconic directors, Robert Zemeckis, who directed Back to the Future. But unfortunately, this may be surprising to everyone, but I'm actually going to put it in the F tier. The first Disney live action movie to be put in the F tier. It wasn't a decent story, and I gotta say I was not too happy about it. And that's really all I can say. Next up, we got Peter Pan and Wendy. Now, technically, we do have other Disney live-action remakes of Peter Pan. Like, there was one from, I think, 2003 that came out, but I'm not really counting that one. If y'all wanted me to include it in the next time I do this list, whenever more live-action remakes come out, let me know. But with this version of Peter Pan and Wendy, I'm actually surprisingly going to put it in the F category too, but I will say I did enjoy it a little bit more than Pinocchio. But unfortunately, they're both like one of the worst Disney live-action remakes that have come out so far. Now, the last movie we have is, of course, last year's The Little Mermaid. In fact, I recently just rewatched it right before I started recording this video. And I gotta admit, I know this is the first time that well, I guess if you count Peter Pan and Wendy, this is the second time that they actually race swapped an iconic Disney character and tried to push a bunch of like political stuff or like push an agenda into the story. But with The Little Mermaid, they only did it for like a brief moment, if I'm being honest. And her being played by Halle Bailey didn't really pull the focus off of the main story. Plus her singing voice is incredible. In fact, so much so that I'll probably put this in the B category, right behind Cruella. I really enjoyed The Little Mermaid, and now unfortunately, the next Disney live-action remake that we're getting is actually a prequel to one that we've already gotten. Not too sure if it'll do better than its actual installment, which is Mufasa the Lion King, and then unfortunately the next one after that is one that I don't know what their plan is for, and that's Snow White, played by freaking actress Rachel Zegler, who has been in the media so much that I swear they need to just cancel the film. Either that or just if they just do it as a tax write-off and then use that tax money for a new budget and put somebody else in the role, for crying out loud. I mean, they got to do something because it's not working for them with Rachel Zegler. But we'll see what they decide to do. Anyways, that's all. That is my tier list for the Disney live-action remakes. And like I said at the beginning, I accidentally added The Lion King twice with the teaser poster. But so yeah, this is my ranking of all the Disney live-action remakes. If there's any that you think I missed, let me know, and I will try to get around to those and maybe do a rehash of this list. But anyways, that's all for now in this tier list video, and I will see all you guys in the next video.